a couple days ago, we did get through the non-aggression pact. Is that right? I believe we got to that point. Okay. So, remind me. Oops. Let's try again. So let's see, we did get through all this one, is that right? We did have this, okay, good. So here's the deal. I want to point out a couple of things before we really get started here. First off, Adolf Hitler has put himself in a very advantageous situation for several different reasons, but one of which is because the Western powers never stand up to it. Now, we were talking before about how when Hitler begins his expansion, he wrote about this. He explains it within his book Mein Kampf, where he says, I'm going to unite the German speakers of Europe into the Third Reich, into a greater German empire. He starts by picking one particular place. Now, I do want to ask real fast. Do you remember, where does Hitler begin his expansion? Oh, I'm sorry. Did we not get this far? Maybe we did. Samson, where did he start? Not quite. He's going to go somewhere first, but you're on the right track. Hannah, where does he go?
Austria.
He goes to Austria first. Now again, German speakers in Austria, they welcome him. The Western Allies do nothing. So then where does Hitler go? Now you can say it's answer. Goes to Czechoslovakia. They should have stood up to him there. They didn't. So then where does he go? What's next on the list? Yes, answer. Goes to Poland. Now here's the thing. Poland does pose a bit of a problem because if Hitler simply rolls through Poland and he gets to the Russian border, are there potential problems right there? Should maybe both sides be a little nervous? Sure. So we need a deal. Hitler and Stalin will sign the non-aggression pact. They promise, I won't attack you if you don't attack me. So let's take a look at the map here. Germany gobbles up Austria, gobbles up Czechoslovakia. They have eyes on Poland, and now Germany and the Soviet Union are allies. Does the world have a big problem here?
Yeah.
Sure. Now, here's what we're going to do to start today. We got to take a look at how when World War II begins, it is very different from World War I. But I want to use World War I as almost like a backdrop, really all day today, because we're going to do a lot of comparing and contrasting. First, do you remember, what's that spark that begins World War I? What takes place for it to start? Samson, you remember?
The assassination of Archduke Ferdinand.
Excellent. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Do you remember who assassinates him? Remember what nation he was from? Samson, you remember?
Austria.
His assassin's not Austrian. The Archduke is Austro-Hungarian. Do you remember who his assassin was from? I'll give you a hint. It starts with an S. What, do you remember? What was that, sorry?
Spain.
Not from Spain, no. S-E-R. Remember what was Hannah, remember?
Oh, I was going to say Soviet.
He's from Serbia is what he is. Is that what I heard you say?
I said Soviet.
Oh, no, he's Serbian. So I want to ask, once that spark takes place, do you remember, or let me kind of say it like this. Who's responsible for World War I? Is it the Serbians? Maybe. Is it the Austro-Hungarians? They invade Serbia. Maybe. Who was that? What you say?
They made Germany.
Germany, and then they invade the Low Countries and they go into France. Sure, maybe. In World War II, it's real clear cut. Germany starts this war when they invade Poland on September 1st, 1939. Now, what we are going to see take place is that non-aggression pact kicks in. We were talking just the other day about how Hitler and Stalin agree. We're going to split Poland down the middle. The Poles have real big problems when Germany invades. This non-aggression pact kicks in. But what we're going to see out of Germany is something completely different than what we saw during World War I. You have to kind of keep something in mind. Hitler was in World War I. He was in the trenches. He watched it take place. And as the years progress, we're going to see technologies change to a point where what happened in World War I is not what's going to happen in World War II. Now, I use this little example because I think, again, it kind of comes back to what we've talked about. Remember we were first talking about industrialization, and I was telling you guys, in like 1900, the fastest you could go was on a train. So you could go about 60 miles an hour, give or take. Within 70 years, and less than that, we're going to be on the moon. This is how industry has pushed technology, where we're going to see things so very different from World War I. In World War II, we're going to be introduced to a kind of warfare that the world was ill prepared to see, as Hitler unleashes what he calls his blitzkrieg, his lightning war. Now, the blitzkrieg is completely different from World War I. Remember, during World War I, defense is way ahead of offense. Do you remember? How far did those trenches move in the 4 years of World War I? Did they really go anywhere? No, they were stuck. They didn't really move at all. In World War II, it's the exact opposite. Adolf Hitler is looking at the next generation of warfare technology. And he says the speed that has now come is going to be our advantage. Now, I want to kind of point something out. Do you guys remember? In World War I, we saw the first generation of airplanes. How did they use airplanes in World War I? What did they do, Max, remember?
More spy craft, just quickly.
Sure, absolutely. They used for reconnaissance, intelligence, absolutely. Remember how they were used offensively? Remember what they did? Can you remember?
They dropped bricks.
Dropping bricks on people. Eventually, they get a little clever. And do you remember when they put the machine gun on the airplane? How did that go over?
Not well.
Doesn't go very well. It's the first generation of airplanes. Now things have changed. Adolf Hitler has a brand new air force called the Luftwaffe. And the Luftwaffe at this point is state of the art. These airplanes can go upwards of about 450 miles an hour. The first planes, max, in the best situation, are going like 150. These things are about 3 times faster than the first generation of airplanes. And Adolf Hitler says, you're phase 1. And phase 1 has very specific targets. I need the Luftwaffe to hit railroads, military bases, airfields, and radio towers. Nothing else. That's it. Those are your targets. When you hit those, you've done your job. Now let me kind of ask you guys. Let's sort of lump all these together. What is Hitler trying to accomplish by knocking out railroads, military bases, airfields, and radio towers? What's he hoping to accomplish? Max, what do you think?
Trap them in, so they can't defend themselves.
You're on the right track. Let's kind of build from that. Let me say it like this. By knocking out radio towers, what's he hoping to do? What does he want to eliminate? Communications, absolutely. What about railroads? Transportation and military bases and airfields. Let's kind of tie those two together. What's he hoping to accomplish by knocking those out? Thought I heard one. Say it again.
Defense.
You're eliminating their ability to counterattack. You're creating chaos. No one can communicate. No one can move. No one can counterattack. Next, you send in phase 2. Phase 2 is the tanks. Now again, we kind of talked about the tanks during World War I. They were big and clumsy and slow. In World War I, the fastest the tanks could go was about 5 miles an hour on a flat surface in an open area. That's as fast as they can go. Now, the next generation of tanks can go upwards of 50 miles an hour. They are literally 10 times faster than what we saw in World War I. And Adolf Hitler says, let them run. Let them go. Use that speed. But again, they have a very specific job. Your job is to encircle the enemy. Your job is in these massive pincers movements. Encircle and trap as many of the opponent as you can. So what they designed is really this big two-pronged attack. We're going to launch one from the north, and we're going to launch one from the south. Penetrate as far as you can into Poland, and we will encircle the Polish army within this big net of tanks. Now I got to ask, if you're in here and you're the Polish army, are you in trouble? Lots of trouble. We have phase 1, phase 2, and it's all based on speed. Now I want to again kind of use World War I as a backdrop. We had airplanes. We had tanks. Were they really effective? Not really. They were used, but kind of just in a weird way. Now they've almost been perfected. I should say it like this. The Poles put up the best defense they can. They stand up to Hitler. But there are pictures, and you can see it. The Polish army is still on horseback. The pictures they have are these Poles on horseback with swords banging against the German tanks. You think this is going to go over well? Now, again, hats off to the Poles. They did as best they could, but they only last 4 weeks. 4 weeks for the German army to encircle the Polish army, and they surrender. Poland is divided. They fall to the Nazis in the west and the communists in the east. They're what's called the double cursed. They're occupied by Hitler and occupied by Stalin. They last 4 weeks in a kind of war that's completely different from World War I. Remember, those trenches in World War I were basically in the same spot from when the war began to when the war ended. Now, half of Poland has fallen to the Blitzkrieg. Things have changed, and we better catch up fast because Hitler and the Nazis have a very big lead. Now again, let's sort of take a look at the map and let's compare and contrast here. First up, Germany gobbles up Austria, gobbles up Czechoslovakia, gobbles up half of Poland, and now has an alliance with Joseph Stalin. Is the world in trouble? Now we have a situation where the Brits and the French will finally get involved. When Poland's invaded, they finally declare war against Nazi Germany. It's too late. You should have stood up to him months ago. Now he controls a gigantic chunk of Europe, and he has Joseph Stalin as an ally. Now again, let's go back to World War I. Do you remember what the big problem the Germans faced in World War I was? Their big plan to end the war quickly. Their big problem was they had enemies in the west and the east. Remember what they wanted to do to try to fix that problem? What was the plan? Can you remember?
They wanted to get all their stuff before Russia got all their stuff ready. They wanted to try to defeat the Russians first.
You're very, very close. Who did the Germans want to defeat first? Brody, who was it? Got to knock France out first because it took the Russians a long time to mobilize. So they thought they had time. How did the plan go in World War I? Was it successful? No, they took too much time. So now, let's come back to World War II. They've gobbled up all this chunk of territory, and Hitler says, I need to evaluate my enemies here. I'm going to go ahead and turn to the west. What is it? Why can't he just go ahead and turn to the west? Why can he leave Stalin